There are places on a map that start as ordinary geography, but eventually turn into questions. The Nevada desert is one of the harshest backdrops in America. It is bright enough to blind you in the daytime and empty enough to make you feel alone at night. Miles of rock and dust stretch out, naturally hiding anything placed inside them. Far out beyond the highways, one specific stretch of this land was designated by chain-link fences and restricted airspace. No welcome signs were posted, no official explanations were offered. There was only a profound silence that forced the public to fill the void. Decades of rumors would eventually populate this empty space, with stories of crashed saucers and extraterrestrial visitors. But the truth is entirely terrestrial. The base was built in response to human fear. The United States government kept this location completely quiet because they were developing aviation technology intended to keep the country alive during the Cold War. Silence was a strategic requirement. Look at the posture of these children. In the 1950s, the United States had just emerged victorious from the Second World War, yet the domestic mood was characterized by dread. A rival power now possessed weapons capable of vaporizing cities in minutes. The Soviet Union presented a massive, multi-layered threat. It was a heavily armed ideological rival expanding its influence across the globe. American leaders worried that the sky itself could soon become a hostile domain. The American military found itself in a precarious position. They were effectively flying blind over denied territory. They needed extreme altitude observation platforms, eyes in the sky that could look down on the adversary without being shot down. To solve this problem, the defense establishment had to engineer aircraft that defied the known limits of flight. And to prevent the Soviets from adapting to these new designs, the entire development process had to happen completely outside the visible world. The dry lake bed in Nevada provided the exact resource the government required: extreme distance. It offered distance from civilian populations, distance from reporters, and distance from foreign intelligence. Planners selected a remote salt flat known as Groom Lake. To convince construction crews and engineers to relocate to this desolate basin, managers referred to the site using a deliberately soft administrative cover name, Paradise Ranch. This deliberate fiction provided a powerful bureaucratic shield. Underneath it, heavy machinery graded long runways and erected massive hangars. The military was constructing a state-of-the-art testing facility while simultaneously denying it existed on paper. Physical access to the site was severely restricted. Checkpoints manned by armed guards choked off the few dirt roads leading into the valley. If you did not have explicit clearance, your journey ended at a barrier in the dust. Inside the perimeter, the workforce operated under strict compartmentalization. A mechanic might service an engine component without ever seeing the assembled aircraft. The structure ensured that if any single person spoke, they could only reveal a fragment of the whole. Area 51's infamous secrecy was a calculated design choice. It was a mechanism engineered specifically to keep the Soviet Union completely unaware of American progress. The first major machinery to roll out of the hangars at Groom Lake was the U-2. It was a slender, fragile spy plane built specifically to fly at altitudes pushing 70,000 feet, placing it safely above the reach of Soviet radar and interceptors. Pushing an airframe to the edge of the atmosphere requires tremendous physical risk. The test pilots flew experimental machines that were still half theoretical. At extreme altitudes, a minor mechanical flaw or a momentary lapse in judgment resulted in fatal consequences. Despite the risks, the engineering teams at Groom Lake succeeded. They converted the dry lake bed into a premier laboratory for surveillance technology, operating years ahead of anything the public or the enemy thought passable. The resulting intelligence was invaluable. Instead of relying on political guesswork or fragmented reports from human spies, American presidents were handed crisp, undeniable photographic evidence of Soviet military deployments. This declassified image shows the detail the U-2 captured. Analysts could identify military encampments, picking out supply tents and missile trailers. Scanning the terrain, they mapped convoy routes and equipment clusters, completely removing the enemy's ability to bluff. Securing this capability at Groom Lake gave the United States an extraordinary advantage. By knowing precisely what the Soviet Union possessed, leaders could navigate international standoffs with hard data, keeping the Cold War from escalating into open conflict. While the intelligence community analyzed photographs in Washington, citizens living near the Nevada testing grounds were staring up at the sky. They began noticing unusual flight patterns and sharp silhouettes that did not match conventional commercial aircraft. Observers frequently reported extreme visual anomalies. A person on the ground might look up and catch a sudden, brilliant silver reflection darting rapidly across the stratosphere, entirely out of proportion with the altitude limits of known aviation. The military naturally refused to clarify these sightings. When a sonic boom rattled windows or strange lights hovered overhead, the official response was silence. Deprived of facts, the human imagination eagerly supplied its own explanations. It is no coincidence that the launch of the unpainted, highly reflective U-2 and the subsequent testing of supersonic stealth jets aligned perfectly with an explosion of UFO reports across the American Southwest in the 1950s and 60s. The mythology of Area 51 took root in the space between what civilians observed overhead and what their government refused to put on the record. A strict no-comment policy turns ordinary people into investigators. Decades of official denials created an environment where suspicion thrived, expanding the story of a classified testing site into sprawling theories of cosmic cover-ups. In 2013, the CIA finally released documents formally acknowledging Area 51's existence and detailing its role in the U-2 program. The geography was confirmed, but the admission only prompted a wave of new questions regarding what else remained locked in the archives. The declassification proved a profound point. A massive, highly active military apparatus successfully operated in total secrecy right inside the borders of the United States for over half a century. This leaves a permanent tension at the site. The absolute secrecy required to protect advanced military research inherently conflicts with the transparency expected in a democratic society. Area 51 began as an urgent solution to a strategic threat, but by locking the gates and shutting out the world, it became a mirror, reflecting our curiosity, our anxieties, and our enduring suspicion of the things hidden in the dark. The desert does not speak. It waits. It stretches for miles under a sky so wide it feels unreal, and in the middle of that silence sits one of the most famous secrets in America. When a place is hidden behind fences and military silence long enough, public attention naturally shifts. People stop asking what the facility actually is, and they start asking what it is protecting. To understand how that happened, you have to look back to the 1950s. The United States was operating under the intense pressure of the Cold War. American leaders believed that if Moscow ever gained the upper hand in the air, the balance of global power could invert overnight. The military desperately needed to build aircraft capable of flying higher, faster, and farther than anything currently in existence. That required finding a completely hidden location where experimental planes could be tested without appearing on foreign radar screens. At its origin, Area 51 lacked mythology. It was an engineering answer to a geographical problem built as a desperate, practical laboratory for national survival. The Nevada desert offered an almost perfect solution. It had dry air, empty skies, and isolating silence. The government acquired this remote dry lake bed at Groom Lake to serve as a hidden outpost. This site became the proving ground for the U-2 spy plane program. Designed to photograph Soviet territory from extreme altitudes, the aircraft had to remain entirely invisible to both foreign intelligence and the domestic public. Absolute secrecy carries a physical byproduct. People living far from the base began noticing odd lights in the night sky. High-altitude test flights produced extreme reflections and sudden roars. Experimental machines like this Bell X-1 behaved in ways no normal plane should behave, appearing from the ground as glowing distortions moving at impossible speeds. When civilians and reporters asked questions about these sightings, the government offered no friendly explanation. They responded with an absolute, unyielding silence. A restricted patch of dust, excessive security, and anomalous lights provided the public with fragments of a story. Without official context, a frightened population had only their imagination to fill in the gaps. The military's total secrecy created an informational vacuum. When facts are completely withheld from the public record, human psychology naturally distorts that silence into fiction. By the time Area 51 entered public rumor culture, the country had already learned a lesson about official explanations. In 1947, near Roswell, New Mexico, the military announced it had recovered a flying disc, only to rapidly retract the statement and claim it was a weather balloon. That reversal taught the American public to doubt. These two locations developed a symbiotic relationship. Roswell introduced the possibility of an extraordinary cover-up. Area 51 provided a locked, remote facility where that cover-up could logically live. The two distinct mysteries fed each other. A crash in one decade and hidden aviation tests in another merged into a singular, massive narrative architecture in the public consciousness. This merger relied on the language of secrecy. The government did not need to actively lie, it only needed to deny access. To an anxious public, the refusal to confirm or deny was actively interpreted as absolute confirmation. This absence of official communication stripped away logical discourse. It left only the emotional shape of Cold War paranoia to define the conversation. Area 51 transitioned into the ultimate psychological battlefield. It proves that human beings will proactively build sprawling, complex mythologies around a restricted airspace, simply to avoid the discomfort of an unanswered question. Every legend eventually attracts its own witnesses. A human ecosystem grew along the perimeter. Amateurs, serious researchers, and modern treasure hunters seeking answers at the edge of the fence line. But they were observing a terrain that was actively participating in the myth. The Nevada desert is wide, dry, and hostile. Its vastness acts as camouflage, making the environment itself feel unwelcoming to curiosity. This land is visually deceptive. Intense heat distortion twists the horizon. Extreme distances and pitch-black nights warp standard aviation lights and sudden reflections into what appeared to be unearthly crafts. The landscape forces a profound sense of vulnerability onto anyone who stands within it. The sky is too open. You feel small. That emotional weight makes the hidden base feel infinitely more powerful and unreachable. The desert acts as a psychological amplifier. It takes a mundane military boundary and transforms it into a cinematic theater of shadows, creating the exact kind of environment where the mind easily outruns the eye. By the time the name Area 51 reached global recognition, the location had completely outgrown its original aircraft testing history. The base evolved into a symbol. It became a container holding all of modern society's anxieties about secrecy and what a government is actually capable of keeping from its citizens. This presents a deeper democratic question. Beneath the speculation about aircraft and technology is an underlying fear regarding trust. It is a question about the power to classify information and the ability to control history from behind closed doors. Public obsession shifted away from the specific hardware the military was hiding and moved toward the terrifying realization that the state possessed the capacity to hide things at all. The legend of Area 51 endures because it represents a monumental structural reality. It stands as a physical testament to the state's absolute power to conceal a private world directly behind the public one. The original Cold War aviation programs that birthed this facility have long since concluded, yet the physical barriers of secrecy remain perfectly intact. The story refuses to die because humanity possesses an intrinsic need to believe that the world still holds compelling, unsolvable mysteries. The harsh environment of the Nevada desert swallowed the factual reality of the base long ago, but it kept the legend breathing across generations. The warnings remain. The silence remain. The true mystery is no longer what is hidden inside the perimeter. The mystery is our relentless compulsion to keep looking at a locked door. As long as that silence exists, the desert will never stop waiting for the next question.